30 minutes or so. Episode 11?
Yeah.
How long are we going to keep this going? I mean, we're not in our office. I think that's pretty obvious.
Yes. Yeah. We're going to keep it going forever.
Tall order. We're
going to take over the Tonight Show. Yes. Talking about cannabis.
Do you love our... this is a talk show. I like this.
I know.
You are my guest.
I feel like Ed McMahon. Am I dating myself then?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Jimmy Fallon. Or, no, I would be Jimmy Fallon.
You would be Jimmy. I would be whoever announces Jimmy, but I don't know who that is.
Okay.
Like the guy who sits in the chair, or a guest.
Sure.
I can be Alec Baldwin as a guest.
Alec Baldwin. Hey,
I don't know why I chose him.
Making a resurgence because of the Trump thing. Have you seen
really?
that? Yeah, he does great Trump impression.
Oh, does he?
Anyways, we're in Vancouver, ICBC, International Cannabis Business Conference. Actually, technically, we don't like to lie to you. It's Thursday.
Right.
We're recording this and then posting it live.
Right.
And actually...
Because I'll be on a flight tomorrow, you'll be doing who knows what, right?
Yeah. Well, and hopefully you're not watching this live because you're supposed to be at New West Summit, which is in San Francisco, which you're hosting a panel on.
Yeah, which is why I'm on a plane tomorrow. During
now.
Yeah, whatever. Right. On a plane as we speak. And, yeah, it's a panel on... basically public stock investing, which is not really my forte.
Yeah. Did you do some homework?
I did a little bit of homework, and fortunately I'm moderating, so I just have to ask questions and let the people who know what they're talking about talk. So, yeah, I mean, I'm interested in. I'm particularly going to ask them about the recent mass roots thing, which you and I touched on a little bit.
Apparently Isaac paid off the debt.
Yeah,
which is fantastic.
Awesome for him. Yeah,
only up from here, hopefully, right?
Yeah. So good on him.
Okay. So New West Summit, if you're in the Bay Area, that's where you belong. There's going to be a bunch of great speakers, a bunch of people returning from Elevate, which is awesome. Continue some of those conversations, and like we said, Sir Richard's going to be there. So that's exciting.
You just decided to stop saying his last name.
I did.
So you don't get it wrong.
I think people refer to him as Sir Richard, so it's cool.
Okay.
But anyways, we're back here in Vancouver. Just spoke this morning. Actually, Carter and I did a little duet on stage. People actually, I think, listened to us for about an hour just talking about the potential for investing in cannabis startups and what is a startup and what is an investor.
Yeah.
So it was an exciting time. We actually got some good questions that we'll jump into in a little bit. Just want to point out, again, we're not live, but we try to be here every Friday. If you have questions, please send them in to ask@gtwy.co. And we've actually made the link to get here very easy. You just go to oh.gtwy.co.
Yeah, awesome. Or you can tweet at us if you need to, right? With, what is it, Gateway OH? Hashtag.
Oh, tweet.
The hashtag.
Sorry.
That you use. Yeah,
I'm terrible at this.
Tweet with that hashtag. That works.
Tweet or Instagram at us with the hashtag Gateway OH.
Yeah. Or comment on Facebook or whatever.
We'll try to find
Call Ben's cell phone in the middle of the show.
You know, I was actually talking to one of our fans, and he might actually be interested in coming in and helping us as a producer. So
I could actually guess which fan that is.
We could actually answer questions live.
That would be cool.
More interesting if we were indeed live.
Yeah, which we normally are.
Right. Yeah. But since we aren't, I don't know. Let's. The conference just got started. We're about halfway through the first day. What have been your thoughts? Have you seen anything interesting?
Yeah, so the conference, I mean, you know I want to talk about this, right? The conference keynote, the opening keynote was by Dr. Gabor Mate, who? Yeah, a lot of people are like, who? I've just had like an intellectual crush on him for a few years, so I was very excited that he was speaking.
Sure, please explain.
He's not a cannabis guy.
Okay.
He's an expert in addiction and something called adverse childhood experiences and how they lead to addiction. And so the concept is basically that substances aren't addictive necessarily, but your personal, like the trauma that you may have experienced as a child and combined with your current environment is what leads you to addictive behavior. It doesn't necessarily need to be substances, it could be other kind of behavior as well.
Sure.
I listen to his lectures when I'm not at cannabis conferences, so it was really cool to see him lecture.
It's like your two worlds colliding.
Yeah, my two worlds collided,
so to
which
speak.
is cool. And he's really into peaceful parenting, which I am as well, and so that's part of his thing. So yeah, it was really cool. He, I I guess he had a chapter in a book about cannabis and addiction at some point. So, and he's obviously an advocate for legalization. He uses psychotics in therapy. So he's doing some research in like therapeutic use of like ayahuasca and that kind of stuff. Not cannabis, but could potentially. And yeah, he was really good. The thing that I thought was interesting about him, which he said, which we've said a little bit, but I don't think people like to hear it in the industry. But I had a lot of respect for him for saying it because it does need to be said. Is he basically said, look, marijuana isn't all safe and all good. It's not like there's no risks with it. It's certainly shouldn't be as vilified as it is. It's certainly a lot safer and healthier than a whole bunch of drugs that are both fully legal and prescription, right? So it certainly should be legalized, right? That's not the point. But to go on and pretend that there's never any problems with it and it's like this miracle thing that, just take as much as you want, whatever age you want for any reason, and like that's not actually true. And so it's not actually a good idea. And so he cited a study that had been done where they measured the effect of marijuana use on kids before their brain had fully developed. So basically
so your brain's not fully developed until you're like
25.
Right, and 26. So more than just kids.
I think for women it's like 24 and the guy's 26 or somewhere in there. It's like that age.
It's like mature faster.
Yeah. Anyone who's been in junior high school knows that females mature faster than guys.
Sure. So,
yeah, I mean, the brain's, somewhere, it's not really baked until, no pun intended, it's not really fully baked until around 25, somewhere around that. And I guess they did some longitudinal studies of people who used well before that as teenagers all the way through adulthood, and they had the result was a reduced IQ, which isn't the end of the world if you're taking it for some other reason that helps you function. But that same reduced IQ did not happen if they started as an adult and used. Now the studies it was pretty broad strokes because they can't do really careful dosing research and that kind of stuff, like how much do you have to take and blah blah blah, because it's illegal. So it's very difficult to do a proper scientific study. But the point is, and it makes a little bit of sense, look, before your brain is fully developed, there are long-term consequences, probably not just cannabis, probably lots of substances. And so you have to be particularly careful with what you do. I wouldn't be surprised, I didn't look this up, but maybe if we were live, we could just say someone look it up and tell us, but it's probably true for alcohol use as well, right? I mean, but I thought it was, I really respected him for saying that to the audience in the room, saying, look, it is awesome, but don't go around just making claims about there being no risk, because in certain cases there are risks and you need to be aware of them. It doesn't mean that you don't use them. I mean, if a teenager's only options to treat some problem are other worse drugs, then maybe that's still the best option. But it is, it's not all Pollyanna, right?
So I mean, I know that we're both on board with the Good Doctor, that we both kind of like have our own reservations about the industry, but like largely it is positive, and that's why we're involved with it.
Absolutely.
But let's be honest. I mean, these cannabis conferences are very like pep rally-ish type feeling. Like that takes some serious cojones to like get up on stage and like put that stake.
That's what I respected about it, because and it's understandable in the cannabis industry that there's the backlash to I mean, he also said this, which is obviously we all know, which is true. There's a whole bunch of misinformation and lies and irrationality on the prohibition side, and so there's all this propaganda and falsehood and emotional, irrational responses to cannabis and all this crap that we've been steeped in for decades. And the natural response once you know the truth about cannabis is to become very defensive, but then I think a lot of people just become evangelical in a way that's also not totally justified. I would say that the evangelists are more accurate than the prohibitionists in terms of reality. It's much more on the it's much more on the everything's great side than it is on the everything's horrible side. But it's not 100% perfect all the time. And there are, he talked about even misusing it as an adult in terms of letting an addiction to cannabis or any behavior, any substance, negatively affect your life and blah blah blah. So, I think I think it's really interesting. And of course, he also talked about all the reasons why you should use it to help focus and to help creativity and to help reduce anxiety and all that kind of stuff. So. I prefer a much more realistic view, and the truth is, there's nothing to be nervous about with a realistic view of cannabis. It's mostly very positive.
Yeah.
So, but I think you gain credibility when you express a realistic view, and the mainstream sees that, and they see, oh, this person's not just irrationally saying, it's the best thing ever, and there's no side effects. This person has a realistic view. And as it turns out, it's very, very positive.
Yep.
Reality is actually very positive on cannabis.
So that's great, and I agree. I think that lends a lot of credibility to him. As the keynote to the conference, what was the general sentiment in the audience? Like, how did they respond to this? Did he end on a high note and bring everyone back in his favor? Like, what was the dynamic there? Especially as someone who speaks at conferences, it's kind of interesting to use that approach, right?
Yeah, I mean, you and I have certainly said things that have also upset audiences, but they were mostly quiet during the part where he was talking about the study.
No booing or hissing.
I didn't hear any booing or hissing. However, during the Q&A, there was clearly some anger over it, right? And someone was like, I don't trust doctors, which is that's how they started their Q&A, and he's like, well, then why ask me anything, basically?
I'm a doctor.
Yeah. So, the doctors did the study, therefore it's bad. It's like, well, that's obviously stupid, right? And then someone was like, well, I took cannabis when I was a teenager for whatever reason, and I did a lot of cannabis and blah, 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 and I'm fine. And, his response was, he's like, I don't have a reduced IQ, and his response was, how would you know?
Yeah.
And the guy was like, yeah, good point. I don't know. It's like, yeah, maybe it doesn't matter. And he also made a really good point, which is these are studies where they show statistical correlations. That doesn't mean for any individual that's necessarily true, right? You could have that not be the case for someone at all. So there was a little bit of pushback in the Q&A, but overall, I think people really liked it, and there was a lot of supportive and positive questions as well. So it wasn't like it was a shitstorm afterwards, but there was a couple expressions of discontent.
Yeah. Speaking of Q&A, that's great. I think it's a great way to open a conference. It grounds everything into the reality that we're working in, and it is a business conference, so there are a lot of business people out there, and you're going to be defending that moving forward, especially if you're operating in the mainstream. We got a lot of Q&A. I felt the people were interested in kind of our perspective on the industry, even though it's as we pointed out, we have a pretty small perspective.
Yeah, very narrow.
Far as the
focus
breadth
is very narrow. Yeah.
But one of those questions actually affects everyone in the industry, and it has to do with banking. So someone in the crowd actually stood up and was like, what's going on with banking, and how do I run a business? If a lot of it's in cash, and how does that affect investment? And then similarly, we got an email. Justin Lassiter, who has the most awesome email ever. It's Rammer Jammer Nation 28. I won't say the extension, but
nice.
Yeah, props to him for having that helpful. So he asked what has been decided as far as a bank that the marijuana industry can invest into. It's a funny question the way it's worded, but it's just a general question that I think we could talk about for a bit. What is going on with banking, and how does that hinder businesses as they're going through this kind of startup phase?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question exactly, because I think if you're looking to invest in a bank, I guess you have to find a bank.
Well, we've actually talked about, this has been a topic of conversation, can we start a sin bank? Because marijuana is not the only industry that doesn't have adequate banking.
Yeah, so you and I have had this, we've had the conversation, I want to have a sin bank, right?
Yeah. Which I think if you start and own a
sin
bank...
in quotes, by the way,
Yeah. It would be awesome.
Yeah, I think it would be great.
I think that takes you to the next level when you own a bank.
You could do something what's that startup? Is it Simple Bank or whatever it is that does the... I don't know if it's
Simple.
not
Simple is the one that Visa has.
Oh, so it's something else. There's some bank that basically has no branches. It's all on the internet, and it's a startup bank, and I forget.
It could be simple.
They were
it's just teamed up with Visa.
Maybe, but yeah, you totally could. I don't know anything about bank charters or whatever, so someone else can.
Anyways, moving on the conversation.
I mean, look, it is an issue. The truth is, there is no like magic silver bullet where like, oh, this is how you solve your banking problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, it's a problem because it's not solved.
Sure.
So, depending on what your needs are, we had a company, metalpays.com. It's called Metal, which is solving it in a certain sense for a lot of people in the industry and allowing you to take credit cards and do electronic transactions and all that stuff, but yet still be compliant with Know Your Customer laws and anti-money laundering laws and all that stuff. I think he's still like in beta or whatever, so I don't think you can use it, but you can probably sign up for it if you go to Metal Pays.
So that helps remove some cash out of the system at the retail standpoint. Right. And maybe from the B2B standpoint, I'm not sure how that gets implemented. But regardless, there is still tens, hundreds, millions of dollars floating around, sometimes in plastic baggies. Like, how do we get that cash back into the system? How do we build a business around that?
Right.
So what a lot of people say is like, oh, well, you can pay for a lot of services in cash.
Right.
And I think that's largely legal as long as it's all within the state borders, right? Like, if you're paying for an accountant services, you have a legal entity.
Does it have to be in the state borders? I don't know.
I don't know.
I think it's probably legal, yeah. Obviously your books need to be in order, but that's a great way to do it. There are a lot of localities have either credit unions or banks, obviously not the big national, not Chase, right? But credit unions or banks that will kind of let that happen, but they don't like to be advertised. So you can't just kind of ask the bankers. You have to ask people in the industry who can kind of give you a wink and an eye and be like, yeah, this bank will do it. And, talk to so-and-so at this bank. You can do that, but it's a slog to find out who those people are. But it's an unsolved problem, and
it's not just a problem for people that touch the plant. Like, it's actually a problem for people that have like ancillary tech companies,
right? Because they might have to get paid in cash, basically,
or just getting a bank. Like we've had people that have had their bank shut down when they were. Grow Room was even having an issue with it. Like,
yeah, you're right. Yeah, and actually we had I won't say their name, but there was an investment company that had an issue. At least claimed they had an issue. I'm not sure I totally believe that claim, but they were claiming there was an issue. It could be a problem. It's not solved. I think the light at the end of the tunnel is really two things, or the kind of the hope here is two things. One is something services like Metal, right? And the other is, I believe once, let's assume that California is going to go adult use in November.
I don't want to jinx us, but I
knock on the fake wood.
I have heard that the polling has put us above that like 10% cap where we have over 60% in the polls, which accounts for the 5 to 6% of variability, which has put the confidence level of that in that kind of like 93 to 5% range.
Yeah, let's hope.
I'm not a political expert, but I'm pretty happy with that kind of feedback.
Yeah, no, I hope that's true. The thing is, I'm always worried about polls, but yeah. So assuming that it goes adult use legal in California, at least my hope is that because California is such a huge market, you already have people now in California, and this is what we said at the conference. You already have people now in California who are driving to Sacramento with cash to pay their taxes, right? Which is a problem. It's a security risk. There's a lot of problems with doing the input, taking in all this cash. People have solved that with kind of reverse ATMs and that kind of stuff, but it's a pain. The hope is that if and when California becomes adult use, the market expands so much in California that the amount of cash that needs to be driven to Sacramento to pay taxes becomes really burdensome, to the point of it being like causing problems, like real problems. And that, hopefully in turn, will incentivize the state of California to start putting pressure on the federal government to do some kind of relaxation of banking regulations, or work around, or have some kind of solution. I don't know, what it would look like. Again, that wouldn't happen overnight. It would be hey, this is a problem, we're dealing with it, something's got to budge, blah blah blah, and like it's slowly.
Also the safety issues of having $4 or $5 billion of cash running around the state, right? It's just
it's horrible. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine $100 million driving to Sacramento every March? I mean, come on.
Right.
So in cash, I mean, so yeah. I mean, I think it'll eventually change, but there's not a silver bullet, and that unfortunately that was the answer. If anyone knows about bank charters and happens to be like a retired chairperson of a bank and wants to do a sin bank, call us up, because I totally want to build a sin bank for not just the cannabis industry, but like Ben said, other industries.
I'm pretty sure the name Gateway Bank is already taken.
It is, but that would be the right name. I think Sin Bank. No one would name their name bank Sin Bank.
Yeah.
So it's probably not taken.
All right. Well, let's move on to topics that we do have answers to.
Sure.
Or actually, I don't know. Maybe the next one we're going to have a similar answer to. Another person stood up and asked this question, and we didn't have a ton of time to really kind of pontificate on it, but where do we see opportunities when it comes to investing in startups in the education space?
Yeah.
And so I think we can start kind of high level. I mean, how many opportunities have you seen come across your desk when it comes to the education space in general?
Well, education is kind of hot. But by education, it's usually correcting. It's like traditional, fix schools and blah blah blah. So ed tech is a thing, but it's like automating the educational system. When I don't see stuff. I can't think of examples off the top of my head in any industry where there's a big opportunity to make money educating about a particular set of products in the industry.
Because in education, ed tech, education has to occur.
Right.
And so
people pay for it.
The better way for that to occur, there's an opportunity.
Right.
But in this sense, in cannabis, education isn't it's not a given, right? It's not a given that people need to be educated on cannabis. We want them as business owners or people advocates want to see education happen, but it's not like a given. People aren't already paying for it. People are always talking about I want to start this social impact company or whatever it is, and it's does this really need to be a company? Does what you're doing benefit from being a company, or would you be better off doing a nonprofit?
Right. Or could it even be a company? Companies need to be profitable enough to self-sustain. Some things can't. They need to be solved. There are problems that need to be solved, and the only real way to solve them is charity.
Yeah.
I mean,
so when you see a social impact startup and social impact investment funds, you're talking about, at the root of it, companies, but those companies have a socially good impact.
Yeah, so the water is a great example, right? One of the founders that I worked with advised maybe a couple of years ago invented a piece of technology that was totally self-sustained, so off the grid, powered by solar, and it used a technology called hyper-dehumidification to extract water from the air, even in dry desert-like regions.
That's amazing.
And produce clean, drinkable water. And so, absolutely amazing. That's something that people will pay for, right? Even if you look at maybe the army would pay for it out of the gate because they can afford it, but then as costs come down, it starts to become accessible to cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and maybe eventually a lot of the world's population that has a problem with potable water can start having these units in their towns or whatever, and that's a social impact company, but it's a company, right? It needs to make money. There was a solution that she came up with that you could build a viable business out of.
So it's interesting. So let's bring that back to the original question. It's is there a cannabis education company? Sorry, Is
there an opportunity?
Is there an opportunity to build a company in cannabis education?
Well, look, I think we did. I think Willow counts as an education company personally. It's not directly the same kind of education, but it's solving a real problem.
So Willow's like a AI chatbot, which is shorthand, but like it's the expertise for cannabis like at your fingertips essentially.
Yes, but the way that so I don't know that Willow would have if they were just saying like we're just gonna provide this generally and that's how we make money. Like I don't know that that's a business model.
Right.
But they were able to figure out a way to provide this information to basically have dispensaries and other industry stakeholders who care about education because it drives their bottom line, willing to pay for it because it helps them make money. And that's the thing that you've got to figure out is if you can figure out a way to do it where someone wants to pay for it. Now the truth is when you're in an industry like cannabis, where there is mainstream pushback and it's a taboo industry, and over lunch we had this conversation about the sex toy industry. Did like went through a very similar thing when it kind of transformed. And when you're in an industry like this, it's the job of all the people who have products to sell. It's those new companies with products to sell to the new users, like the new people coming into the market. Education is part of your marketing budget. Like you need to educate people to drive adoption of your product. Yeah. And so education doesn't happen in some kind of central format. It happens organically with all of the companies that need to educate consumers in order to drive adoption of their products. And if you can find a way to help those companies or help them do that, and I think Willow is a great example. It's like, look, we're offloading the problem for you so you can use our service to accomplish your goals. That they'll pay for, right? But you have to come up, whether it's that model or another one, you have to come up with a model where you're not just solving a problem that you, and maybe everyone agrees exists existentially, but a problem that people will get out their checkbooks and write checks to you for, right? And that's, or flunk down piles of cash. You need to solve a problem that people will give you money for, and do it in a way that they'll give you money for. And so if you can come up with an educational solution that does that, yeah, absolutely, it's investable. That's just, it's not as straightforward and obvious as you might think, and so that makes it a little bit more difficult. So, you know, what's not investable is like, I'm going to build a website where it's all the information about cannabis. Yeah. Like, okay, that's great.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, what I keep gravitating back towards is like, what are you going to educate them with? Like, what information is out there? Like, we have a lot of anecdotal information, and we have ideas that it's like, oh, this strain is good for that, but it lacks a lot of scientific backing. And so, if I were to go out and create my best version of an educational platform, would I be any better than what's on Google right now? And I don't know. Like, I just feel like maybe it's too early to have an education company. It's like I don't feel that there's been enough money to go into research. Like, research is being done, but there's just not a ton of research studies. Certainly not enough that are, making the claims that the industry is making at this point.
Not everyone in the industry, but some. Yeah.
Sure.
No, and I think that kind of like we almost circled back to the beginning where we're talking about the evangelism, right? So, like you said, there aren't, what will have to happen in this industry is like scientific studies rather than anecdotes.
Yeah.
And when you just have anecdotes, the education is kind of murky and unreliable. And also there's a lot of stakeholders, like if you're a doctor, you're probably not going to want a lot of anecdotal information in order to make a recommendation, right? You're much more convinced by like, here's a study that's scientific that was done that shows
by doctors,
right? It shows like this is what happens, or even by pharmaceutical companies, which is maybe a separate issue. But you want something that's very scientific, which means reproducible and large enough, reproducible, scaled, like a large enough population that you've got a decent sample size, and following all rules for minimizing any kind of bias or corruption to the data. And so, that's not the same thing as like, my Aunt Sally took blah, 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 and her tumor went away. Like, that's great. And maybe it did.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But maybe that doesn't happen for everyone. And there's a study that needs to be done to figure out, like, when and how and why that happens and blah, blah, blah. And so for the kind of medical side, that kind of education, I think, you're right, and it's too early for. But I think there is some education that all the startups need to do, and it's very basic. It's like, hey, there's different things that you can use marijuana for that you might not have thought of in the past, like CBD for inflammation or whatever. And you don't always have to get high, and you don't always have to smoke it. Like, there's some kind of general pieces of information, and if you have a particular product that you think is great, like, my tinctures are the best for some reason, like, then you need to educate people on why. But that's your problem. It's not an industry problem that people don't understand why your particular thing is good for something. And again, it may be an existential problem in the sense that it would be nice to have everyone know this.
Yeah.
But from a business perspective, it's really the problem of the person trying to sell it.
Well, and that's why, like, if you're in the CPG, like, creating products, if you really are interested in continuing to grow your company and garner a larger, more customers, a larger market share, that you need to actually be thinking about that. And, like, the product, even just the packaging that you have, like, needs to have a sense of education. Like, just selling a brownie that's going to get you high, like, is not going to be what carries your company forward into the future.
No, it'll work for a lot of the existing market.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Your existing customers.
Parallel to the sex toy industry, which we don't have to get into, but the new entrants didn't have a lot of information, and there was taboos, which were and there were stigma. Some of it was valid, and the companies that were breaking that stigma and doing something different and having a different attitude needed to educate customers about. And there was a whole, sex positive movement that was part of the growth and the transition of that industry from kind of the old school to the new school. It's a little bit different with cannabis because the illegality makes it even a bigger transition, but it's a similar concept.
Okay. All right. Well, we're running a little long. We wanted to keep it a little bit of a shorter episode. But speaking of legality, there was a little bit of news this week. We've gotten into this habit of maybe touching on a news item or two. We're going to reserve today to just one special little article that came out. And in that, I'll just read it. In a leaked speech, Clinton promises bankers to stand against pot legalization in all senses of the word.
And that person go in all senses of the word.
In all senses of the word.
Yeah, I was reading this article.
And so, I mean, that's a blow, right? Like,
yeah,
or could be.
Well, I mean,
depending on what "in all senses of the word" means.
Yeah, as you know, I have an article coming out. I'm not sure when, kind of,
or where.
I'm objectively analyzing, trying to objectively analyze both Trump and Clinton's position on cannabis and its effect on the industry. But this has been a historical problem for Hillary. Has been she was against the drug war for a long time. Now she's now said she wants to move to Schedule 2, and she's kind of softened her position more recently. But there's a little bit of trepidation and distrust on her sincerity there, and this certainly casts a weird light, casts a negative light on it. Can I just read, like, so she was speaking to she's speaking to Xerox's chairman. During an onstage Q&A session with Xerox's chairman and CEO, but I think it was at a Wall Street event.
Yeah, it was for bankers.
Someone was explaining to her what long and short means. I just want to get the actual quote out.
Yeah.
So someone was explaining to her what long and short means. And they're saying, so long means thumbs up, short means thumbs down. Or long means I support it, short means I don't support it. Right? So she's explaining this to Hillary. And she says, okay, I'm going to start with, and I'm going to give you about 10 long shorts. So she's going to ask questions, like 10 questions, where Hillary has to say long or short. You support it or no? And so she goes on and says, okay, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if it was the first question, but whatever. She says, so, legalization of pot. And Clinton's answer is unequivocal here. It is short in all senses of the word, which means, like, nope, I don't support it in any way, which is, disconcerting,
to say
the least. Whether she's completely changed or not, I don't know. It would be nice for her to address this and find out from her. Like maybe she changed her mind. I don't know.
Do you know when the video was taken? Was that in the article?
Hold on. I think it might have been. Hold on. Let me.
I mean, I'm assuming it's relatively recently. Or
2014, March 2014. I mean, recent for the rest of us, but for politicians who change their positions on things all the time, sure. I don't know if March 2014 is like the same as 3 decades.
Their opponent being the poster boy of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, who knows?
Great.
That thing I said 5 minutes ago is no longer. What? And actually, what was the Clintons? Back in the Clintons' presidency, they coined this phrase, which was awesome, which was like, "Oh, that statement's no longer operative." She's like, I lied, or whatever. It's like, oh, that's just no longer.
The landscape has changed.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe she has had a change of heart. You know, in the same leaked WikiLeaks docs, she also though said you have to have a public and a private position, and they're different. So
interesting.
You know, who knows? But it's definitely a problem. I don't think Gary Johnson's going to get elected. So.
Not if he keeps sticking his tongue out at people and wagging it.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have. I don't think we're going to have any form of federal legalization. Really.
As you can tell, we don't have a major allegiance to any political person or party.
Yeah. I have publicly stated I'm an anarchist. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. So
that party does not.
It's not a party. It's
right, so you have no options.
I have whatever.
But you do have the option. I mean, Gateway Nation. If things do go to shit. Vancouver is beautiful.
It is gorgeous. It's gorgeous.
There's some great office space, like right here, a waterfront,
and it's like the Silicon Valley of Canada, right? Yeah, it's great.
If I could take a seaplane to work every day, that would be awesome.
Yeah, no, it is a great refuge if you need to escape.
So, having a great time up here at ICBC. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Carter, for your ever valuable enlightenment.
Thank you for your ever valuable enlightenment and for being the host. Yeah, and thank you for Rush. Thank you for pressing buttons, including the one you're about to press.
Beautiful. Hi, everyone. It's Friday morning, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Is it standard? No. Daylight time, right? PDT.